Great. Great. Good evening, everyone. So this is the Police Accountability Board meeting for October 22nd, 2020. So as we begin tonight's Police Accountability Board meeting, I will note that we are continuing to suspend in-person meetings temporarily in compliance with executive orders. Our meeting is not taking place in City Hall, but rather through video conferencing. We are continuing to offer meeting access to the public by linking to our meetings live on the Police Accountability Board Facebook page and by broadcasting them on City Council's YouTube channel and possibly sharing them on Council's Facebook pages. We can check into that. But the meeting video will continue to be available through these routes even after the meeting is complete. So I am going to go ahead and move on to the approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections? Is everybody reviewed?
I make a motion that we accept the minutes if no one has any corrections.
Okay. And I'm waiting for either any corrections. You got a couple more seconds. And if not, I need a second, please.
Jura, a second. She raised her hand.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't see her. Okay. All right. All in favor? Okay. Remember, I wish I could see all of you, but I can't. So say aye. Thanks.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, Daniel.
Aye.
Thank you. All right. And no opposed and the motion carries. Right. And so we are going to, hold on, folks. Okay. So we are pleased to welcome our new executive director, Connor Reynolds. And we are going to hear some of the things that he has to tell us with he started working on Monday. So we're really pleased and interested to hear what he has to tell us tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to you.
Wonderful to be with all of you tonight. Let me share my screen so that we can get this presentation up. Okay, let's go from the beginning. There we go. Can everyone see that and hear me? Great. Well, this is my first executive director's report. I'm so happy and excited to be with you all. As Chair Wilson said, this is my 4th day in the job and we've been getting to work, and I'm happy to report back on all the details of that work. So here's what I'm going to be discussing tonight. First, the work that I've done, what I've learned, and the work to be done in the future. But first, I want to have a brief, a brief statement on threats and harassment that is important for both the board and the public to hear. Shortly after the board announced me as executive director, I and my family experienced a number of troubling incidents that threatened our safety. The details of these incidents have been disclosed to federal law enforcement authorities. These incidents and all forms of threats and harassment are attempts to silence this board and end its work. Any such attempts will fail. This board will not be intimidated. We will be safe and we will do our work. Chair Wilson, I'd like to reserve time at the end of the meeting for a non-public executive session where I will discuss how we are addressing these matters in any law enforcement investigations. Thank you.
Got it.
Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get to the work that I've done. First, the onboarding that I'm doing, it's still in process. Really what I want to highlight here is the wonderfulness of City Hall staff, specifically folks in City Council. BJ has just been really wonderful, taking time on top of all the other million things that he is doing to get me set up and on board. There's still quite a bit of work to be done there, but it's going to happen. And I still have some mandatory meetings that are going to take up a bunch of time next week, but we will get done and we will get underway. Part of that onboarding is also finding permanent space for us, and same, BJ's been doing above and beyond on that. I won't discuss the details of it yet. I think the board members have seen some of that over email, a little bit about that space, and I hope that we can get there as quickly as possible. And thank you to environmental services and everyone else who's working their tails off to help us on that. So when I was announced, I promised I would be listening, and I've been doing that from day one. I've had dozens of meetings, meeting with many people. I've met with board members, religious leaders, community activists, City Hall staff, met with Mayor Warren, the police chief, members of the RPD, and so many others. I've learned so much, and I'm so excited to share that with you board members once I finally finish up having sit downs with every single one of you. But I will continue to do that work, and it's just been wonderful. And I've also been doing work on the governor's executive order on policing. It was a little, not unexpected, but I think that it's changed the amount of work I'm able to do this week. This focus on the governor's executive order on policing. I'm going to be talking more about that at the end of this little presentation. I want to review what I've learned. First, City Hall is filled with dedicated, talented people who are under immense pressure. Now, you know, the city's under a great number of crises from financial to public safety, and everyone is just seemingly trying to do their best jobs. And I think understanding both the talent and quality we have at City Hall, as well as the pressures people are under, are going to help us understand both the speed and work that we can get done here. Another thing that I've learned is just an immense amount of graciousness from the community, and how trust is so important with working with folks, not just in City Hall, but within the community, and the willingness of people to give me personally trust to begin with. I promise that I will earn that trust going forward, and just thank you for everyone who's given me the time of day. Finally, I think it's very clear there are novel powers and duties. What makes this board unique? It's incumbent on us to educate the public, the press, and especially other government officials about what makes us special. And I'm going to be committed to doing that moving forward, because it's important for people to understand our special commitments to transparency and procedural rules that other agencies simply don't have to follow. And I'm going to be talking more about that publicly and in my day-to-day work. So I hope to follow up with you board members over email to discuss some of those specifics, and then we'll be talking about that education work in a little bit. So, you know, I've had a chance to sit down with most of you to have one-on-one sessions. It's just, again, thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I know I haven't met up with every single one of you, but we're going to get that done as soon as possible. And my apologies for any disruptions in getting those things scheduled. But here's what I've heard already. First, you have some priorities, and these priorities are educating the public about what we can, have been doing, and what we will do. Another priority is proving to this community that we can create real change soon. Now, that doesn't mean getting everything done or changing the whole system overnight, but it does mean this community deserves to see the work we've been doing and reap its fruits, the fruits of our labors. And finally, empowering board members through concise discussions of our powers and duties. I'm going to continue to try and keep meetings like this one and my presentations at these meetings both concise and informative, and I look forward to hearing feedback from both you as board members and the public about how I can do so better. So here's the work to be done. First, getting a budget to HR so that we can get through the budget review process and I can hire people as quickly as possible. I had some wonderful meetings with Tom Miller in HR, who's just a fantastic partner. And we're going to be moving quickly on this, cutting through some red tape to get things done. And just thank you to HR and everyone else involved in the hiring process for helping us get the staff we absolutely need. Conducting more listening sessions. There's so many people I haven't heard from, so many different perspectives in this community, from especially people who haven't been called to these many tables of power. And as I said during my announcement speech, if you haven't heard from me, please reach out. The work to be done, when I told the board, when I submitted some information to the board during my application process about hitting the ground running and what I wanted to do early on, two of the things I haven't been able to do because of some of this executive order work is draft some potential changes to bylaws and set up and present maybe potential frameworks for board staff division of responsibilities. I still think that work is of utmost importance, and we will be getting to it soon. I hope to do that over the next week, working closely with all of you. Okay, so finally, the work to be done is the governor's executive order. And so I want to talk about this for an extended period of time because it's clearly the most pressing work coming out of City Hall on public safety reform. And we have to figure out both the details of that work and how we're going to approach it as a board. So here's the basics of the governor's executive order. It was issued back in June. It requires local government executives, including Mayor Warren, to convene task forces to address policing reform. Each task force must perform a quote unquote comprehensive review of their police departments. For us, that's the RPD. The task force has to create a plan to improve the RPD based on that comprehensive review. And then City Council has to adopt a plan, the plan, that the task force comes up with by April of 2021. So let's get into the details of what this work looks like in Rochester. The mayor asked us this week to be on a task force. And we had a meeting earlier this week where we discussed some of these things. It looks like the task force is going to be made up of people from the mayor's office, RPD, UCLM, City Council, and race. Right now, there's 13 key questions assigned to different task force members. Those questions range from things about officer well-being to use of force to disciplinary review. And the key thing that I think we should all understand is the PAB can provide answers to every single one of those 13 questions. The mayor's office is running this, and so the key questions have been assigned to different groups. But I want to make clear, and the mayor's made clear, that we can provide answers to all those questions. So the timeline is this: is that we have to have this task force. Whoever's on the task force has to have a draft plan done by January of 2021. Then over January to February, there's going to be a public comment process. And then in March, City Council will be debating over this. And by April 1st, City Council has to have approved the plan. So here's the challenges with that pretty rapid timeline. First, 60 to 90 days to perform a comprehensive review of an entire police department is a high bar. And no other task force member can commit the necessary resources to complete a comprehensive review. And that includes us, because right now, we have one staff member, and that's me. I'm still getting onboarded. It's going to be a process of finding space, hiring staff, and the ability to do a 60 to 90-day comprehensive review is just tough. Now, these challenges, there's been some proposed solutions coming out of City Hall to address these things. First, using the past work done by race the Race Commission over the last few months seems to be a foundation for doing this other work, because race has been having the occasional meeting, engaging with the public on some of this stuff. You have to remember that race is a kind of county-city joint task force. It no longer has, the police chief was moved off of it, so its ability to fulfill the Executive Order 203 requirements, it might not be that way anymore, which is why I think this task force is being impaneled. But race has done some work, and I think that will be incorporated into this task force work. As I think some of you saw and was circulated around email, the mayor has released a public survey to try and engage some community, to try and engage the community on some of the priorities for this work and how it should be done. And then, as this community has been hearing for the last few weeks, hiring some outside entity, the proposal from City Hall is Wilmer Hale, to lead the research and then reconcile the recommendations from amongst the different task force members. And as I understand it, there's going to be a subgroup that is set up to supervise that if there is an outside entity hired, supervise their work. The PAB has a slot on that supervisory committee. So, the next steps for this executive order work is a Tuesday meeting with Wilmer Hale. I have not heard back if that's going to be live streamed yet. I may have missed an email on that, but we will find out. And, I have been invited to that meeting. I believe Chair Wilson was also invited. And the other question is, do we participate? And so that's kind of the next big question here. And, this is a question for the board. This question of do we participate? And it's a question for the board to decide, probably not tonight, but sometime in the near future. And I just want to quickly review my understanding of the positives, negatives, et cetera, without providing a recommendation on this, because that is your task as I see it. So here's some of the positives. We have a seat at the table. This board has been asking for many months to have a seat at the table. This is a table. We've been invited, and that's an important thing. Second, we can shape the recommendations. As a task force member, we have input, especially in terms of supervising Wilmer Hale, it sounds like. Our ability to both answer questions and then supervise some of the research done on those questions by Wilmer Hale allows us to change whatever plan comes out of this task force. As I understand it, the mayor will be allowing folks to issue dissents or disagreements in the back of the final plan, which may allow us to both participate in the work and then disagree with any recommendations that actually come out from the task force as a whole. This can be a potentially useful data point in the longer term work that we do. You know, I think everyone agrees that the deep work of reimagining public safety will take years, not months. And this plan and the data that come out of it, more importantly, can help us do that work potentially. It also shows the community that we're getting to work. You know, this task force is a real thing. They will be conducting work, and you know, by participating in it, we may show folks that we're hitting the ground running. And because of our unique powers and duties and our commitment to transparency, by participating in the task force, whatever parts we participate in, we can help make transparent. And that might be a separate and unique value that we can bring to this task force. Now I want to go over some of the negatives, which are real. This can take away resources from our other work. You know, right now we have all volunteers, set of board members, and I am the single member of our staff. Every hour devoted to this work is an hour that we do not devote to independent oversight hearings, to generating rules and regulations and procedures, and hiring staff. And because, you know, as I'm quickly learning this week, there's simply not enough hours in the day to do all of our work, thinking carefully about whether or not to engage in this potentially a high level of work is important. Second thing is that we don't run the process. You know, the governor's executive order tasks the mayor with convening and running this. And while we will have a seat at the table, we won't be, as I understand it, we won't be scheduling these meetings, you know, circulating all of the documents. We'll have a say, but we won't have control. And despite the potential for dissents, people may associate us with all of the plan's recommendations. And if, you know, members of the community do not like those plans, think they're inadequate or otherwise, our participation may simply be permanently linked in people's minds to this work. Now, given all these negatives, it doesn't mean that they can't be managed. So here are some ways that I've thought about managing these negatives. First, setting public expectations clearly about, you know, the limitations of everyone involved being able to do this work, how this process will work, and how it is just a single data point in what will be a much longer amount of work that the PAB does. We can also delimit our involvement to make sure that while we do provide answers to the questions, those answers answering those questions do not take up all of our time, and that we focus on broad changes, knowing that diving into the details is going to take months and years. An important thing also is inserting that the PAB is the tool for achieving long-term change. You know, answers to a lot of the questions in the governor's executive order, you know, answers to questions about how do we regularly review policies and procedures, how do we engage the public in public safety reform, how do we discipline officers, the PAB is the answer, and the community is, you know, the overwhelming number of Rochester voters have supported that answer. And so emphasizing both inside and outside this work that the PAB is the solution, it has to be the core of any plan, is a way to manage some of these troubles. And on a related note, you know, emphasizing that giving the PAB more resources to do the things that we've already been tasked with might be the best short-term plan for change. And so just that kind of ends my little spiel on Executive Order 203 and the task force moving forward. There's lots of more details to this, and I'm happy to answer questions online and offline about these things. But to wrap up, I just want to go back throughout everything I've said and kind of do some key takeaways. Here's what's on deck. First, from the board, I'd like to hear, you know, from any of you, email, text, let me know who I should be dealing with. You are experts in this community. If there are folks who you think I should be meeting with, please let me know, because I want to meet with those people. And thank you to everyone who's already offered to connect me with groups or individuals. It's been invaluable. Second, you need from me bylaws and that framework for responsibility. I hope to have that to you a few days before next board meeting, so that you all have a chance to take it over, look it over, and then we can have a fruitful discussion about it in the next board meeting. And then, of course, you know, that big question of deciding, whether to be involved in this Executive Order 203 task force. As I said, there's a meeting on Tuesday where we'll be, discussing Wilmer Hale's work. I'm not sure when City Council will be voting or not voting on that. It's clear that the mayor is working very hard and is very committed to the success of this task force, and that the mayor is pushing to have outside help and the staff support that wherever it comes from clearly is necessary to get this done quickly. So I'm not entirely sure of the immediate time frame on this. That's all to say is that the sooner the board can decide this in the next week or two, the easier it will be for me to start engaging in the day-to-day this. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about what I've been doing the last few days, anything I brought up in this report, any other details, and just thank you for listening.
All right, I have a question. Well, a couple of questions. One is, when you applied for the job, you gave us a proposal about office structure, but we have not discussed that. And it seems important to me that before hiring starts, we have an understanding of kind of what the plan is, both in terms of structure and priority. So I think we all need an opportunity to discuss that in some way. So I kind of want to flag that. The other thing, I guess is are you proposing in terms of the task force that we wait until a report from that Tuesday meeting and then sort of make some kind of decision about our participation?
I defer to the board on when to decide. I bring up the Tuesday meeting simply because I've been invited and I'll be attending. Yeah, so if the board wants to wait to hear more about that, but as I understand it, the task force will be moving forward regardless of whether or not an outside entity is hired. And so, whether the task force work will continue regardless of what happens on Tuesday.
Okay. And the other question is so there's no intention from in your understanding, and this doesn't really have to do in that sense with our work, but the assumption is that if an outside firm is hired, it's going to be Wilmer Hale, and there's not any sense of additional due diligence about their results elsewhere or looking at other firms. Is that correct?
So as I understand it, the top priority is for City Hall, and I don't want to put too many words in their mouth, is just that to hire an outside entity of some sort to provide immediate staff support.
Right.
And it seems like because there's been a comprehensive proposal from Wilmer Hale that City Hall is focusing on that. I have not heard about alternatives. If there are alternatives, I would love to know about them. I'm happy to alert the task force about those alternatives. In the context of these task force meetings, I have not personally heard of anyone else being considered, though there may be.
Okay, and I have one additional question, which is, has anything been said about the funding for Wilmer Hale, and if that's funding that can be applied to a PAB budget?
So the mayor, I think the mayor has said publicly in some of these meetings involving Wilmer Hale that this funding, some of it comes from the decision to not go forward with that substation, that community center police substation in Beechwood, and that these are funds that have a limited number of resources. I have not yet heard about whether those resources can be applied to the PAB. From my understanding, there's a real sense, at least in City Hall, that the PAB won't be able to hire the staff quickly enough to do the work. The process of hiring, onboarding, go through HR may take weeks, and the mayors seem, getting this task force off the ground, doing the work, I think wants to be done in probably days, week or two. I am happy to communicate whatever the board wishes in terms of funding here. I think throughout this process, I'll just stop with that. And I'm sorry, just to answer your earlier question, Rabbi Settle, in terms of the budget, I am happy to send that revised budget. I want to make clear that what HR needs from me is a budget that is only set at our operating budget. So essentially a plan for me to spend the other $300,000 we have. And probably it's less than $300, honestly, at this point. And so, in my open conversations with HR, it sounds like we're going to be able to hire, if I'm trying to hire senior staff that can get some of this important work done, I can hire 2 people. And right now I'm looking at hiring, and I will definitely send a more detailed plan to you, but looking to hire some kind of lawyer / general counsel and then a communications person.
Thank you.
Reverend Nikoloff? Oh.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. 2 points. Thank you, first of all, for all the work you're doing. Really inspiring to see what you've been doing and all the people you've been meeting with. One recommendation might be to reach out to our former board member, Michael Powell, and his constituency, who have voiced vocal opposition to your appointment, and to build some bridges there, just because I know they represent a vocal portion of our community. And even though we might disagree with their opinion on your hiring, obviously, because we voted for you unanimously, still to hear the concerns of that portion of the community, because I think they are very real and legit, and I think you are more than equipped to answer them. So just when you ask for people that you should meet with and talk with at some point, I think that'd be important, and I think they have some important things to offer you as well. And then the second point I wanted to know, I know that you have a lot of people to meet with. We're in the midst of, it's not something that's in the public very often, but the collective bargaining agreement with the police union is very much a live thing. And I know that even though there's lots of people to meet with in the community, there's also the police, the Locust Club, and Mike Mazzio and other folks. So I wonder what your plan is to not only engage with them, but also to help bring transparency to the collective bargaining agreement process that's happening. Because at the end of the day, that's a large piece of police accountability and our ability to engage with things. So I don't know if you can speak of that now, or if that's something you can speak to at a future meeting, but those are 2 points I'd love to hear you talk about.
So instead, I'm just going to address question by question instead of waiting and collecting questions. So first, on reaching out to folks who all members of our community, especially ones who may not agree with my selection. I just think it's a top priority. I want to make sure that I do that in ways that are on those folks' terms, and that actually build trust. And so I'm happy to meet with people. I want to do it in the right way. And my top priority, of course, is not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And so my priority for all folks who may be skeptical about me is to show that I'm here, I'm doing the work, and I'm going to keep my head down and focus on that. And you're going to see the results soon. And so on your second question about meeting with folks at Locust Club, police officers, top priority of mine, absolute top priority. Honestly, it's the onboarding process has been a little tough because it takes up sometimes entire days of my calendar that I have to be at these meetings. But know that I'm continuing to reach out to these people. And, in the next, I would be shocked if I didn't meet with folks in the next week or two. And in terms of the collective bargaining agreement, I couldn't agree more that it's important to bring light to that process. I think what folks are realizing is that there are so many balls in the air right now. And an important thing that I think this board can do to help me do the work is select some priorities. About where to send me, because at the end of the day, it's your wisdom and expertise that is going to ensure that my work is in the right path, given the limited resources and time that I have. And so I really do want to talk more about the collective bargaining agreement, because you're right, that's a short time frame thing, just like the executive order is. I saw some questions from Bob. I didn't know if you wanted to.
Thanks. One comment first, and that is, I don't think the board has any real choice but to participate in any activity such as the mayor's committee. So I don't think our participation should be a matter of discussion. That's a matter that has to be done. The second suggestion that just occurs to me, that kind of a random thing, is that we should work to accumulate the expertise that's present in the local community in the form of university faculty in mostly criminology departments. The few people that I've spoken to, they've been here for a long time. They've been actually looking at the police department for a long time, and they already have some pretty clear observations about what's going on. The last thing that I would say is the police contract contains a lot of very stifling parts that have to do with discipline as opposed to pay or duties. And I would not like to see that get fixed in place for another 3 or 5 years. I would hate to see it allowed to do that. That's all.
Bob, every comment you said, I hear. And on the university faculty thing, I forgot to mention that I have reached out to university faculty, and many of whom are extremely interested in meeting with us. Something I didn't mention during the board is that Yale Law School has committed to providing student and faculty resources in the spring to support our work. And I'm meeting with other law school faculty, local law school faculty, who will hopefully be managing that work so that we have local people, local folks helping us out. And, I'll definitely be reaching out to RIT and other folks because that experience on criminology is just so important, and we can't leave any resource untapped.
So I just wanted to add briefly that, Dr. Harrison and myself have spoken to folks at RIT in March, April. So we do have contacts and we do have outreach that's already begun. Okay. Does anybody have any other? Oh, Dr. McIntosh, go ahead.
Connor, can you, and you probably spoke to this, but I know some of the big concern from the community, some members in the community, is the fact that, the budget, the larger budget. So I guess what I want to know, or if you can speak to, is if you don't get that budget, how much work are we realistically going to get done, and how can we do that work? I know you mentioned some supports from Yale, but what are some other options, if you're not able to hire the staff that you intended? Can you speak a little bit to that? Because I think that for some people are concerning.
Well, first, a preliminary answer, I think, on, my commitment to getting resources from wherever. Again, the primary hope is that City Council will get us that long-term funding we need, but I will go anywhere and everywhere to get us the resources we need to get the job done. But on that question of assuming we don't get any resources, right? We are limited by the budget that we have. I think that transparency is such an important thing. And we have remarkable, unusual, perhaps unique powers and duties regarding transparency. We have to be unusually transparent in our work. And even beyond subpoena power, we have special powers to make almost all of City Hall's work transparent to the community. And though, transparency can take some time, but it can also be low cost. And so holding oversight hearings on things that the community cares about listening to the community, facilitating public engagement. Those are low cost, high value things that I would prioritize. I still think that, that it will be useful for me to have some guidance from the board about the kind of ranking of issues, so that I know what this, from you folks, where you want to go first. But in terms of the actual powers that we use, I truly think that the oversight powers, the power to bring the public eye onto issues, to open things up to sunshine, and then constantly be doing, getting what the public's priorities are about public safety out there. And so, we talked about budget, right? Having people understand how Rochesterians want to spend our limited public safety dollars, right? That can be something that's done. That's going to cost some money and time to do it right, but I think that would be another possible way to move forward without all our legal powers and without our full budget. And I'm happy to discuss this in further detail, write a memo, anything that the folks want on that.
Connor, can you just answer another question regarding the budget? So when you were doing your research on budgets across the country, how did you, when you talked about that at your announcement, can you kind of dive further into how you found out about budgets and kind of the work that went into finding what you found?
Sure. As a preliminary matter, I study and, for years I've studied and taught about administrative agencies, how bodies like this one do their job. And the watchword is capacity, capacity, capacity. You can look at someone's powers and they can be exceptional on paper, but if they don't have the resources, they can't get the job done. And so looking at budget documents from other cities that have civilian oversight boards was a really important part of my preparation. And understanding a little bit about the budget rules in every city can help you understand what a budget document actually says. And so, I think Oakland is potentially the best option, best parallel for us to look at, simply because of other civilian oversight boards. They have similar powers, though they have some different ones we don't have, and we have some very important ones they may not have. They also have a similar structure of having a 9-member volunteer board and then an executive director to run a bunch of the operations. And they also have a similar number of sworn police officers. It's changed a little bit this year. I think they now have 50 more than us, but still very close. So if you look at the similar number of police officers, and then you do what is the budget spent on civilian oversight, Oakland does 4.3 million. 4.3 million. And if you talk, as I have to, the leadership, the chair of their board, you talk to the staff on that in that agency, and you ask, is 4.3 million enough? They'll kind of laugh, because it's just not. Processing these complaints effectively. Look at some of the most well-established civilian review agencies in the country. Look at Chicago, look at New York City. What are the average times to process a complaint? I think in New York, and I'm sorry, I don't have the data in front of me. I believe in New York, it's 180 days. And I believe in Chicago, it's something closer to 270. The city charter requires us to propose a budget that allows us to process every complaint in 90 days. So you can do some basic math about, okay, how much is this board getting in terms of funding? How much staff do they have? And how many complaints are they taking in? And you do a little bit of math, which I'm happy to make public. And I've done some documents that do actually do the calculus on this. And what's clear is that there's a certain ratio of full-time staff to complaints processed in 90 days. And the ratio is somewhere around 3.75. And these things are a little abstract right now. So what it really means is that to get through the number of complaints that we should be looking at. And it's not just, let's say that we lose our disciplinary power. We still have the power to investigate complaints, right? So no matter what, we're going to be dealing with complaints. And when we investigate those complaints, let's assume that we have a few hundred, right? How many full-time staff do we need? You can do the math to figure out how much we need to get in that 90-day window. and we need dozens and dozens of staff. Now we could sacrifice some things and say, well, you know what, community members, we're gonna be really delayed. We're gonna do 90 days, 180 days, 270 days. And I also want to remind you, you know, on a per person basis, I want to make this concrete. Ask an investigator in Chicago how many complaints they process in a month. One investigator in Chicago, how many complaints they process? 3 on average. 3. Right now we have 1 staff member and enough to hire 2 other people. That's 3 people. How many complaints can we have? And remember, investigators, all they do is process complaints, nothing else. All they do is process complaints. So if we devoted all our staff time, all those 3 people, all our staff time just to investigating complaints, we could get 9 done a month. So I think that should the community needs to know the limitations we have in our current budget. I'm going to do whatever I can with the money we have. We will be able to do real things with our current budget, but some of our powers might not be able to be exercised in the way that this community probably wants them to. And again, you know, I'm happy to make these figures public. Happy to make them, you know, public to you. And there's so much more research we can do. I've only done in-depth budgetary, you know, calculus exercises, about 5 to 10, but there's so more we can look at too.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? No one? Okay. I think we are also wondering about the confirmation process. And when is that scheduled, folks? Can we hear from? Yeah.
We're in the process of scheduling that. I just solidified a time. Pardon me. I just solidified a time or two to share with Connor, and I also have to share it with the council members. But the intent is to have it prior to the confirmation hearing, prior to the November council meeting, so that legislation could be voted on at that meeting. Details to come.
Thank you, BJ. Okay.
Johnny, I had one note from my presentation I didn't say. Do you mind if I?
Yes.
I just wanted to say, you know, this week, you know, starting off, you know, when you start working any place, there can be little gaps in your work, you know, stumbles. And I just want to say a special thank you to all of City Hall staff, particularly people in the mayor's office who've approached my work with grace. Mayor Warren has been particularly responsive and appreciative of my work, of me getting to work. And I just want to say thank you publicly to all staff at City Hall. And I've already thanked. I think I forgot to call out Beth too. Beth's just been amazing and remarkable. I'm so sorry, Beth. I should have remembered that with BJ, but man, what would I do without Beth? Woo! I don't want to know. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to know. But just thank you all. And again, for the grace in dealing with all this. I really appreciate it.
Well, we all know without Beth, all of us would be lost. So we know this for sure. So yes, that's pretty much, we know this so much.
You finally made Edith smile.
Oh. He's so charming, right, Ida? Come on. Okay, folks, let's see. Give me a second, please. All right. Can we talk about what we want to do about meetings? We want to meet. I know that we had been meeting every other week, but we want to meet. We wanted to talk about future meeting scheduling. So weekly, every other week, can we just get some discussion in on that, please?
I think we have enough stuff to meet every week.
I agree.
I agree.
My only concern is that we also need to find a way to find the time for the educational work we need to be doing now.
Yeah, that was my concern as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, folks. So I wonder if we should we should still consider that, just based on all the education and committee work that we're going to have to be doing for the next couple of months. So does anybody have any other thoughts?
Is there any way we can make, like, depending on our schedules? I saw some people's schedule in the email thread, but depending on our schedule, can we make like one meeting shorter just to be respectful of everyone's time. And then we can also get the educational things in as well.
Can
So
you
I know, I'm sorry, go ahead. Sorry. Steve.
expand on that?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
mean
so-
the dates that were proposed for the smaller groups, or what do you mean specifically?
You said the first part again,
I
Dr.
said,
McIntosh?
do you mean the dates that were proposed for the subgroups, or what do you mean specifically?
The dates that were proposed for, one moment, let me look at that
The-
email.
Yeah,
I don't
it was
believe the
for-
dates that were proposed by Shani, I don't think those were for the subgroups. I think that was just for meeting times in general.
No, those were for smaller.
Oh, it was, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a good point, though, that, we can consider, possibly meeting for an hour versus an hour and a half, or, try to make accommodations for folks' schedule, especially knowing that we have a lot of outside work to do. But we can work on doodle polls, and we can do some other stuff, because we've got, and I think that was my agenda item next, was talking about future subgroup meetings for our own education, and continue, we wanted to have some education as far as in little pods. And so we wanted to have that stuff as well. So we've got executive, we got education, and then we have learning, just individual learning for us as well. So we've got some stuff on our plate.
I have a
Go ahead, Danielle.
Who's responsible for keeping up with our education hours? So as we move forward with this and we educate ourselves over the next few months, who's responsible for keeping track of each of our hours so we can present this? Or, just keep track of it in general.
I can jump in on that. So I think we need to figure out how we want to do that. I don't think we have a clear plan on that. So if we're talking about the readings that we're doing, I would suggest that it would be kind of like a book discussion, perhaps. So maybe we divide up 2 or 3 chapters, and then we have a day and time that we come together and discuss that, or build some questions around those topics. So I don't, just because, and maybe just meet for an hour to just discuss that, because I don't know how flexible everyone can be. So I think we're going to have to maybe have that process, but I don't know if that works for everyone.
I actually like that process. If we do go with that, I'll be willing to kind of create like a tracker and get everyone's schedule to we read a chapter or we read 2 chapters, whatever we come up with, and then create a meeting time for us to discuss that. And then we can all calculate the amount of time we want to put down for those 2 chapters, and, go like that until we finish the book. I'll be willing to create like a tracker if we decide to move forward with an idea like that.
Okay. And I think in our subgroup, we'll be talking, Bob had sent out a list of different educational topics from the beginning. So I think when we meet in our subcommittee, we can add different topics to that, and then we can figure out our academic partners or faculty partners that have been in the conversation before that Shani and Bob talked to. Then we can probably go forward with building out a schedule for that specifically. But I think getting the book discussions out of the way that we've kind of discussed, may be helpful.
One of the things that I think we tend to do is we tend to talk about topics as though they're all by themselves. And I don't think, for instance, we're talking about our educational activity now, and I don't think that we are placing that in perspective with the other activities that we have as a board. What other objectives, so what priorities should this have compared to the other objectives of the board?
So I think that will all be something we'll have to, education committee, that is your primary responsibility, right? Is to figure out what are the most pertinent things that we should know as a board, and then go ahead and move forward from there. But I completely agree. And I know also too, Connor, you can weigh in here as well, that we wanted to have some education on and walk through the legislation, ask any questions to make sure that there's a thorough understanding of the legislation that we all have to abide by.
And just to say that, you know, breaking out into pods, one-on-one, however you folks want to do that, I'm more than happy to facilitate, because those are informational sessions that won't be deliberating, there won't be a convening, it's not open meetings law stuff. So however we can get it done. And the only thing I'll say is that, you know, part of the reason I want to work to get that staff hired is because the more staff we can do, the more time I'm going to be able to have to do some of that.
Great, thank you.
Also, is Connor going to be able to use the list of people that applied for the executive director's position as possible candidates?
Well, that's up to Connor.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I understand there's a ton of very qualified, very enthusiastic people, some of whom even indicated that they wanted to be a part of this, regardless of whether or not they were executive director. And if folks are comfortable with me, you know, pulling from that pool, I think that would be a great head start.
I'm sorry, my internet dropped out here, but I don't know if you came to any conclusion, but for instance, it seems to me that actually we could do that educational session about the legislation next week, right? There's no reason why we can't start scheduling some of that stuff. So if we go to, and the other option, because I know for the public notification, we could certainly schedule, if there's something we need to vote on or decide, we could have a weekly meeting announcement and use the opening time for anything that has to be done for a meeting, or just say that we have no business, you know, right? So it doesn't have to, in that sense, be either or. And we can leave some time if there is business, but with the assumption that we wouldn't do more than a half hour of business in those alternate weeks. That would be my proposal. I would like to propose that.
I like that. Yeah. Okay.
I would just also reiterate the importance of the public component of that, which you've already said earlier, that any education that goes to the board, any way we can help accountability be a community practice and a community participation would be great. That we see it as not just something for the 9 board members or the 8 board members at this point, but creating any, as we've talked about, creating materials, creating videos, creating simple ways that the majority of the community can understand what they have in this board, that we represent the interests of the citizens of Rochester, that they have a voice in shaping the priorities of the board, and that they know what their voice means, so that we can really create almost a community accountability precinct that goes alongside the police precincts, so that they know that they're part of this process as well. And I think that that's a priority voice. So I want to affirm that and continue to make sure that we do that in a way that is as communal as possible.
That's also a great point. Wondering if we could make some of those educational sessions public as well, because I think that it's an easy way to engage the public, right? It's an easy way to, you know, everybody can tune into YouTube. We can put it on Facebook and other, you know, social media, and they can tune in. And then if it's recorded, we can use it again. So.
And or alternatively, we record it and then put the appropriate section on.
Exactly.
That's another way of doing it.
Yep.
Okay, I would encourage us to do it that way, to be honest.
Okay. Is there any more discussion? Did anyone else want to weigh in on that?
On the education portion? I didn't know if anyone
else wanted to say anything. And I guess for me personally, since we initially had a calendar of dates already that went out and I accommodated my schedule around that, I guess we'd have to figure out if we are actually making changes again to that.
So can I just weigh in, folks, real quick? You know, Dr. McIntosh brings up a great point. You know, a lot of us are healthcare providers, you know, folks that are working around the clock. And, you know, maybe we could just start with looking at the schedule as it is. And just like Rabbi Settle suggested, just start looking at that, you know, maybe do a half hour of business and then move into education or something like that. So just like, and then work with that schedule, then kind of branch out from there.
Sure, Wilson, can I make a suggestion? Or, you know, to kind of meet all these points, I wonder if it might be useful to have pre-recorded sessions of, essentially, me or a staff member, probably me running through this and like in little half-hour chunks or something. And then not only the public can consume that at their leisure, but also board members could, and then send questions, by email. And so people can do the education on their time. I don't know if that might be a useful thing. If folks think it would, I can make that a priority.
As a teacher, I have to say, I think education happens at a much deeper level in seminars rather than lectures. So while that might be possible for some things, I think the ability to have back and forth as we go is really important. Dr. McIntosh, so I'm sorry, I guess my question for everybody is, can we say we're going to spend every Thursday doing PAB, or do you mean that your schedule is already set within every other week?
So we sent out a list of updated dates for the end of 2020. Okay.
Correct. My understanding was with the understanding that those in-between weeks could be used for education.
Right. So I mean, if that's what we plan to do, then that's fine. But we just have to make a decision on that. I guess I just need to everyone to be clear and on the same page so I can have, a plan.
So my proposal is we are together every Thursday, and starting from this week, every other week is a full meeting, and the in-between weeks we have at most a half-hour meeting with an educational program.
Ida?
Yeah, I just wanted to also mention that my schedule is based on leaving Thursdays open for to meet. And I could do some Tuesdays because I do have other community meetings that I have on Tuesdays, but those are pretty much the days that I have available, the Tuesdays and Thursdays. But Thursdays definitely totally committed to PAB.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like there's more discussion that has to be had on this subject, so we can talk about that offline, unless anybody else has anything they need to weigh in on.
I think we should go over everything again for Reverend Harvey.
I think actually we can have a decision about this, because if we need to decide, are we meeting next week, and are we having the educational session on the legislation? Right. So can we just make a decision? Like, we're going to meet every week and go to this alternate week schedule in terms of meetings and education. I'm going to move that. If someone wants to second it, we can make a decision.
I'll second.
Matthew seconded.
Matthew seconded. Anybody is more discussion? We welcome the discussion here, folks.
So how much time would we meet for? Would we meet for the same amount of time, or would we do an hour, or what exactly?
I think we need the same amount of time. Especially, again, we're going to get in. Yeah, I'm just going to say that. So an hour and a half every week.
I would just caveat that in addition to a seminar style, us talking and people can kind of weigh in, that we would find a way to make it as participational and or disseminate it in digestible chunks for the public as well. Like, I think of, as we've talked about, like, Governor Cuomo style, like, here's some bullet points, here's kind of like an infographic or some basic ways to grasp some key dimensions of the legislation, so that if people don't have the time to sit through a seminar, they can at least have no excuse to say, like, look, the PAB has done its best to let you know what we do, and if you don't know at this point, like, it's on you, not on us. Like, I'd like to make sure that people have that access as much as possible, but also to encourage them to attend and or participate and listen to the meeting so that they can get the more in-depth picture if they so choose.
I'd like for us to stay as close as possible to what I think are our duties, and that is to evaluate RPD policies and procedures, and when possible to participate in disciplinary proceedings.
Just a quick point of order here. I just wanted to make sure I understood this correctly. So you're talking about open meetings every other week and educational sessions in between, or are you planning on every meeting being an open meeting, just for the sake of complying with
my proposal was that every other week we have open meetings, and the in-between weeks we schedule a half hour of an open meeting, but we may or may not make use of it depending upon what's on our agenda.
So just a reminder, there are notice requirements related to open meetings, so we just have to be very clear as to when those are being held.
Right, but the thing is that I think, you know, we can say we have no business today. Basically, that's, you know, right, but we have to, given how quickly we're moving, and I'm happy to have other opinions about this, but there was a concern that we make sure that we are able to respond as things come up and decisions have to be made.
Sure.
I'd also like to just push back, Dr. Harrison, that yes, the things you
Wait,
said are
wait a
deeply-
minute. No pushing.
Oh, sure, no pushing, just responding. Yeah, but that building a constituency of participation and public education is also part of the legislation, and even if it doesn't happen in the legislation prescribed public meetings, I do think there's ways to also proactively do that rather than just doing the bare minimum that the legislation prescribes. Especially if we end up not winning the lawsuit, we need to have public support in order to help support the findings of the board. I think any way we can involve the public and make sure that the voices of our constituencies are heard.
So if there's not going to be any consistency, if we're going to say some days we may have 30 minutes for business, we may not, we may have an educational session. If it's the legislation specifically that we want to talk about next week, I have no problem with that. But I think going forward that we need to have some consistency for our education. If those are going to be informational sessions that we do independently, I think that's fine. Others may feel differently. But if we're going to say some days we're going to do a half an hour and say no business or maybe business, I just feel like there needs to be some consistency.
I think you may have misunderstood what I said. So those in-between weeks will always have an educational component. Whether we need to do business on those days, we won't know in advance.
Okay, but then
So another,
if they're not really
presumably
open
that's
meetings.
what the education group is going to work on in terms of putting that schedule together.
So Stephanie, but that 30 minutes that we may do business needs to be an open meeting. So then there needs to be some kind of informational notice sent out, right? So
Right, so there's a notice set out every week with the understanding that in the alternate weeks, the public meeting will take no more than half an hour and may be canceled if there's no business.
I can hopefully add a little bit of clarity.
I'm sorry, can I say something before you, BJ?
Absolutely, Ida.
Can we also ask Stephanie and BJ, and I don't know if Beth is going to continue with us, you know, is every week going to be possible for you guys too? Because I know that you guys, you know, have a lot to do as well. I think if it's educational, then you may not necessarily have to be there. But if we throw any kind of business in there, then you guys are going to have to be there. And so I think we also need to not just consider our schedule, but also their schedule, because I know that they have a lot of stuff happening at City Hall on Thursdays as well. So
Speaking from, sorry, I thought you were done.
Take them into consideration.
Speaking for myself, this will likely be one of, if not my last meeting, unless Connor is anticipating needing my help or support, or if the council and staff are invited to a meeting for a specific reason. Stephanie will be assigned to the board. All boards and commissions have to have a legal representative from the law department on them as part of our city's practices. And so as much as I appreciate your thought and consideration, Ida, it will not impact me directly. And I know that right now Beth is continuing to help support until the PAB has some staffing, and we can talk with Connor about whether or not he would like to continue using some of the PAB dollars to do that. And that is a conversation that we can certainly have. But I would also note as to what the rabbi or Drora was saying, I know she doesn't like to be called the rabbi, what Drora was saying is that you could feasibly notice meetings and then send out a cancellation. And that is totally appropriate. There are boards that sometimes will send out, I think it would be most appropriate to have a full annual meeting schedule that you're able to post in January, and then be able to cancel meetings if needed, and then add meetings as needed, but hopefully less adding than and as you get your sea legs under you and really understand the format of what board meetings will be, I think that you'll definitely have more of that. But to answer I think that may have answered all of the parts that I was asked, and happy to jump in whenever or answer any questions as support, but this is Connor's show now.
Yeah, I'll just say that I'm planning on the next meeting, running it technological and all that. Again, thank you to BJ for running this one and all that. My time is your time. And Thursday evenings, every Thursday evening, I have blocked off until eternity for you guys. So, folks.
So it looks like there's still some questions about what the scheduling is going to look like. So I do not think we're going to have all the answers that we want to have tonight.
Well, I think we need to decide if we're meeting next week. And I think we need to decide if we're going to just sort of set that time. I guess I don't understand why we can't make a decision.
Well, from what I'm hearing is no one was opposed to meeting next week. I think from my understanding, it was just more so from next week moving forward, we need to set something in place that's more consistent so we can work our schedules around it.
Madam Chairperson, I move that we schedule a meeting for every week with the alternate weeks having at least 1/2 hour allowed for education when available.
I think that motion is already on the floor, that Dora made it and Matthew seconded it. And
I just clarified in the chat, right? So week one, we have 90-minute meeting. Week two,
I apologize.
30-minute meeting with 60 minutes of education.
I apologize. So I call for the question.
Okay, so then we can take a vote. All right, all in favor of Rabbi Settle's proposal? Okay, hold on, keep your hands up, please, so I can see all of your hands, your lovely hands. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Come on, Celia.
Okay, so there's 5 and 6. All right, so we have 2, 3, 4, 5. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so there's 6. 6 are in favor and then opposed. There's none opposed? Okay.
People can abstain.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we need, okay. So are there any abstentions? Reverend Harvey?
So it's the week 1, a 90-minute meeting, and week 2, a 30-minute meeting, 60-minute education?
Both are 90 minutes.
Yes, both are 90 minutes, but the reason I said it that way is the meeting being the sort of the public meeting, and then the second week is divided into time for a public meeting if we need it, and then an educational component.
May I make a quick note, Rabbi? Dora, I'm sorry. You don't have to
Rabbi
notice.
Public, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, you don't have to notice the length of the meeting. You just have to notice the start time. So you could choose to have, you could choose to just notice the start time. And if you had only 20 minutes of business, you could adjourn and then do education. And you don't have to do 90 minutes 1 week for a meeting if there's educational things. So just to clarify, you could just notice that.
Okay.
Okay.
And
All right.
I think Connor also said he needed some minutes at the end for.
Yes. So I'm just, before we move on, I do want to make sure that we've answered Reverend Harvey's questions if he has any additional.
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
I got it. I got it.
Okay. So I'm just going to say that the motion does carry then. Okay. All right. So then we're going to go ahead, and I know that Connor wanted to go ahead and ask for an executive session. So may I have a motion to move to executive session to discuss a matter regarding something that Connor would like to bring up?
Public safety issues that might threaten public safety and involve active law enforcement investigation, section 105 A and C, 1 A and C of the Open Meetings Law.
Okay, can I have a second, please?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ida. All right, and everybody's in favor of executive session?
Chair Wilson, can I just to make clear, so after this executive session, there will be no additional business. We'll come back on, but then it'll be done. So people could tune out now, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
As soon as the motion is voted on and accepted. So all in favor of moving to executive session? Sorry, I didn't see hands. Okay. All right, and there's none opposed. All right, so motion carries. We're going to go ahead and move into executive session.
I'm sorry, I didn't see who made the motion. Could somebody just identify?